Hello everybody, Luke Schulte, Field Agronomist for Rex Hybrids. The dry weather of 2024 certainly led to some disappointing yields along the way. However, without that added moisture, particularly in August and September, our VOMITOXIN levels were much more reduced in comparison to 2023. When we had the cloud cover, we had the wildfire smoke, and we certainly had much more moisture that led to those higher VOMITOXIN levels that we experienced in 23. Now fast forward to this coming growing season, if we're in a two-crop rotation, many of them same VOMITOXIN infested fields in 23 are going back to corn in this next growing season. That, along with the fact that several weather prognosticators are indicating we very well may have an above average moisture growing season, could lead us to the higher potential for VOMITOXIN to rear its ugly head yet again. We certainly know hybrid differences exist when it comes to VOMITOXIN susceptibility, but could nitrogen management also play a factor?
So over the course of the last couple of growing seasons, we've come to the conclusion of just when nitrogen is taken up and the direct influence that it has. And it's that early nitrogen uptake or accessibility prior and up to about V4 that has a direct influence on successful pollination. And then nitrogen taken up after about V6 has a much heavier influence on overall kernel depth as well as plant health. And I think that can be learned and kind of confirmed if we look at our nitrogen rate study. Okay, so this is multi-location data looking at various rates of nitrogen. Those numbers are indicated. The total season-long nitrogen volume is indicated by those numbers below those green bars on that bar graph. And our control in this treatment is left of that blue line. It's how we used to apply all the nitrogen within our PFR studies. So it's 190 pounds of total nitrogen, 30 pounds on one side of the row in a 2x2, and then 160 pounds of sidedress. Every one of those 5 treatments to the right of that blue line, there's one major difference besides just the overall nitrogen rate. We've moved twice as much nitrogen to that planter pass. We're now applying it on both sides of the row so that we can ensure, regardless of how those roots tend to grow initially, that they intercept it. But more importantly, we've increased that rate to 60 pounds. And we can do that when we're putting it on both sides of the row safely. But you can see, with the exception of 250 pounds of total nitrogen, if we look at those net return numbers at the top of each of those green bars, that those 4 treatments there, where we're utilizing anywhere from 130 to 220 pounds of total season-long nitrogen, by having 60 pounds up front on both sides of the row, all were more profitable than that left-hand treatment of having fewer gallons or fewer units with the planter. If we look at compared apples to apples, those 2 treatments within the yellow and the green rectangle, 190 pounds of total nitrogen, but simply shifting more of that nitrogen to the planter pass on both sides of the row at all these locations led to nearly a 5 bushel yield gain or a $20 gain. If we look at our lower organic matter soils at that London site, that number rose by about another 50% or over 7 bushel. Now here's how it has a direct influence and how we can confirm that has a direct influence on pollination and ultimately VOMITOXIN. In our hybrid rep trials, we do not utilize with our research planters 2x2. Those planters might be in Wisconsin one day and then in Worcester the next. So the volume that's required with 2x2 just isn't practical with these research planters. So we utilize just in furrow. And as you know, you can't utilize any volume of nitrogen in furrow and keep it seed safe. So we have a limited amount of in furrow. And then our nitrogen practices are reliant on the plot cooperator. We utilize the plot cooperator to apply the nitrogen, and so we utilize his practices. So up at the Genera plot, this particular grower side dresses ammonia. So there was not really any nitrogen applied till after V3 in this particular plot, just that little bit of in furrow. And these 2 pictures were taken of the same plant on the same day. And as you can see by the far left, it's the first day of pollen shed. But yet there in the center picture there, you can see that same plant doesn't have any silks that are being pushed out of that ear shank or where that ear leaf connects to the stalk, indicating there's going to be some pollen wasted. When we went back later on, a week later or so to learn what was the overall success of the pollination, we see all those remaining green silks on the tip of that ear, indicating they're not going to be pollinated because pollen shed had commence, and that's going to result in those green silks that are still hanging on. And at the end of the day, that's going to result in tip back and lost yield. If we look at the performance of this particular hybrid 6235 at this plot, it was almost 6 bushel below the plot mean. But now let's look at that same hybrid in a different setting with different nitrogen management at Arcanum, where the ammonia was actually, in this case, applied pre-plant. So if we look at the same scenario, pictures taken from the same plant, same day. You can see by the far left, it's the first day that that tassel's starting to shed pollen, which is matching up very, very well with the first, or roughly the first day of which those silks are coming out. So there's not going to necessarily be pollen wasted because the silks weren't there to catch that pollen. And the result was incredibly favorable. In this case, different plot, I realized, but in this case, rather than being below the plot average, it was well above the plot mean. But there's a long-lasting tail. Why does nitrogen management have a potential influence, particularly early nitrogen management have the potential to influence VOMITOXIN? It's because those green silks are the highway to VOMITOXIN getting in the ear in the first place, or Fusarium that causes Gibberellic mold and VOMITOXIN. This is a picture. The center picture is a picture that I took from South Charleston last year. We had a lot of dry weather. Obviously, with dry weather, pollination is more challenged. But it's those green silks that remain unpollinated 3-4 weeks after pollen shed has commenced that are the highway to getting that Fusarium in the plant in the first place, that results in Gibberellic ear mold that lends itself and translates to VOMITOXIN at the grain elevator. So even though those silks or those reproductive structures aren't being seen till a tassel time frame, we know the ear is being developed around V5. Silks are part of that ear. We believe that early nitrogen has a direct influence on overall more pronounced silk development, leading to that ASI, or that anthesis to silk interval, to match them very well and have more thorough, complete pollination, just allowing for less of a highway and less of a mechanism for Fusarium or Gibberellic mold to ever enter the ear in the first place, even if we're in utilizing a hybrid that has maybe a little higher susceptibility. So in conclusion, early nitrogen management, those practices we're putting into place within our crop plans today have a direct influence on overall yield and at the end of the day, VOMITOXIN. I realize applying 20 gallon with the planter, if you got a good bit of acres, may not always be practical, slowing the planter application down that much. If we're going to utilize either supplementally to a 2x2 application to get us up to that 60 pounds, if we're going to utilize, say, a weed feed or urea application, please remember, because that application is much more diluted versus a concentrated band utilizing with the planter or conceal, we're going to increase those rates accordingly to ensure that early accessibility to nitrogen by about V4 can help us to have more pronounced and more pronounced silk development, ultimately influencing pollination and leading to potentially less VOMITOXIN within our grain at harvest. So as always, if you have any questions around this topic or any other, feel free to give us a call. Thanks for tuning in.